Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the South Burlington Development Review Board for May 6th, 2025. My name is Dawn Philippert. I'm the chair of the board, and I'd like to introduce the other members. Charlie Johnston, Jody Lesko, Frank Kochman, John Moscatelli, Mark Baer, Quinn Mann, and our staff to my right, Marla Keene and Marty Gillis. Thank you for joining us. This meeting is being recorded. There are a couple of ways to participate, one of which is to be here in person. The other way to participate is to do so virtually online, and you could also call in and participate by that way. Regardless of how you participate, it's important that you register your participation. If you're in person here, please sign up in the sign up table out back. If you're participating virtually, please note your contact information in the chat. Thank you. In the chat box. And if you're on the phone, please let us know your contact information by emailing Marla at mkeene@southburlingtonvt.gov. That way, if you ever want to participate in an appeal, you will have a documented registration as a participant. So let's start with the agenda. The first item is the evacuation procedure. In the event of an emergency, there are doors in the back of the auditorium. You would exit either of those doors and turn left or right, and you would be outside of the building. Item number 2, are there any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items? Hearing none. Are there any announcements? Hearing none. Are there any comments and questions from the public that are not related to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll move on to number 5, which is our first project to review this evening. Item number 5, continued site plan application SB 2506 and conditional use application CU 2501 of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Burlington to amend a previously approved plan for 126,875 square foot educational facility at Rice Memorial High School. The amendment consists of constructing 4 tennis courts and an equipment storage shed, pervious and impervious walkways, an 18-foot tall bleachers, and 25-foot tall accessory structure in proximity to the existing athletic fields that will house concessions, bathrooms, and a press box at 99 Proctor Avenue. Who is here for the applicant, please?
I am Greg Dixon from Krebs & Lansing Consulting Engineers.
Greg, did you say?
Greg, yes.
Greg. Hi, Greg. Let me swear you in. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Okay. I was not here when you presented before, but our staff have sent us a memo, a one-page memo, kind of outlining where we are. I was not sure. It said, staff recommends that the board work with the applicant to address the issues identified herein. It wasn't really clear. Was the issue the stormwater? Okay. So what I see no red comments of questions. So Marty, where do we go with this, please?
Sure, yeah. So there were, I think, 11 comments in the initial staff comments, and the applicant successfully addressed all except 2, which were stormwater comments. And then today, through some wrangling over the phone and via email, Greg, Marla, and Tom DePietro from DPW were able to get together, and they've sorted out the stormwater stuff. So we have the thumbs up from DPW on the provided stormwater plans, so that is no longer an issue. So the board is free to close the hearing,
Okay.
since that results in the resolution of the 2 outstanding comments.
Okay. So having heard Marty's comments, does anyone have any questions or comments? No? Okay. I would entertain a motion to close the hearing.
Move to close.
Thank you, John.
Second.
Thank you, Jody. Is there any discussion?
Quick question. Because we open, do you have to take public comment before you close?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Quinn just reminded me. Before we move to close the hearing, let us entertain any public comment. Any online? No. Okay. Sir, none here. So again, we have a second. We're in discussion. No questions, no discussion. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Closed. Opposed? No. Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you very much, Greg.
Yep. And thank you to staff for helping us with that today. Thanks.
We have great staff. We're very lucky. Okay, the next project. Site plan application SB 2517 of the City of South Burlington, Patrick Leahy Burlington International Airport for a portion of the first phase of an approved master plan for an existing airport complex. The project consists of constructing approximately 4,000 linear feet of recreation path and installing landscaping on vacant airport-owned properties located between Airport Road and Dumont Ave at 1200 Airport Drive. Who is here for the applicant, please?
Larry Lackey for the airport. Let me get this closer.
Stu Moncrief with Jacobs Engineering Group.
What is your first name, please?
Stu,
Stu?
yes.
Thank you, Stu.
And we have Jackie online.
Hi, Jackie. Yeah. Okay. Raise your right hand, please. Oh. Yep. Okay. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jackie, your microphone isn't on, or something. Can't hear you. Jack, no, I'm saying Jackie.
Oh, can you hear me now? Maybe
There
there's a-
we
Thank
go.
you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Don,
Yes.
I guess in light of all these kind of conflicts of interest, I do have, Jacobs is obviously huge, but I'm doing a large project with them through work, totally unrelated. I don't see any potential issues, but just,
Okay. Thank you for raising that, Mark.
Yep.
Does anyone have any objection to Mark participating?
No.
All set? Good. Okay, we have a staff report to go through. Before we dive into that, does any member of the board have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure,
So
go ahead, Charlie.
Did the master plan, and we saw a visual of the path, and there's been some changes to that. Could you talk about why there was changes to that?
I'll touch on the ones. We've had multiple meetings with the Department of Public Works, and they were requiring crosswalks on certain streets and lighting and signage, and that also included, because of those raised walks, some storm drainage improvements to make sure there's no ponding. That's all I can think of. Stu or Jackie, can you think of anything else that might have changed since then?
There were just some minor alignment changes in general. It follows the same route, but we did, just make some adjustments once we got our survey in, just to make sure that we were avoiding trees as best we could, and just, kind of stay within sort of the open area, not within the canopy of any trees or anything like that, just so we can avoid damage to trees as best we can.
Yeah, and this was done with all the departments in South Burlington. We met with all of them. We all walked it, like 20, 30 of us. And
Honestly, I was reading the staff comments, right? And there was a few questions about like the airport deli, right? And I started looking at it, I was following the path, and it didn't go to Dumont Street where it used to go, right? And then it doesn't include all the other improvements. So I was just wondering,
Okay. When it comes to Airport Deli, we are now, in fact, working on a site plan application to remove the building. Okay, so that'll be another welcome to you again. So,
That airport deli is a great loss. Just Okay. Any other questions before we go through the comments? Pardon me. Number one.
Excuse me, I do have a question. I don't know if you can see my hand up. I'm online here.
Okay. What is your name?
My
Are you
name's
a member of the
Michelle.
public?
My name is Michelle Corpus.
Okay, Michelle. We take public comment after we go through the series of staff comments. So if you just
Okay. Sorry
wait,
about that.
please, we'll invite
Sure.
you to make your comment. Thank you.
Sure.
The first comment suggests that the applicant remove the rec path from the lot coverage calculation. Is that something you can easily do?
Yes. Jackie, why don't you take the questions and we'll, add if we need to, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Jackie's
that
prepared.
one's easy. We can certainly remove it from the lot coverage.
Okay,
worksheet.
thank you. Number two, if you could clarify the design of the, not airport, aviation, thanks, deli, parking lot and the path.
Yeah, so originally, currently what we show is that rear driveway to Aviation Deli, the one that connects to Elizabeth Street, it's fairly wide. So we decided to basically situate the path on the west side of that driveway. Originally, we were going to put in a timber guardrail. Once we got into the stormwater and the need for sort of a vegetated 5-foot shoulder and then an infiltration trench, that sort of pushed things over a little bit. That timber guardrail came out of the plan in the Aviation Deli area. However, we have learned recently that with the changes to the Aviation Deli and that rear driveway at Elizabeth Street is now going to close. So we are going to put that timber guardrail back in that area. And I know staff had asked us to put in a connection. That was not shown on the plan simply because we weren't exactly sure what was going to happen with that Aviation Deli in the parking lot and how that path might connect. But in general, we're working right in that parking lot as it is. So any connection is going to sort of reuse any existing gravel that would be in that area. It would be a relatively minor thing. We would break the guardrail in that area and just allow people to park in that parking lot, access it from Airport Drive, and then access the path from there through that break in the timber guardrail.
Okay.
So is what you're describing, Stu, I'm sorry, I was half paying attention because I was trying to help get the right plan on the screen. Is it in the private land that you're going to be making that change, or in the city right of way that you're going to be making that change?
To the
layout of the guardrail and the
that
driveway.
would be, I would expect, unless we have permission from the city, that would just be on the Aviation Deli parcel.
Okay, so this is your site plan application though. So the plan, what you get approval for is what you need to build.
Okay.
So doesn't sound like that's a controversial change in any way, and I think the board would be fine with it, but we do need you to submit that plan.
Okay.
Is that something you have for us today?
So we do not. We can submit that showing the timber guardrail, and then we can kind of show it at a better scale so that you can get a sort of an improved feel for how that would actually look. The scale of these plans is obviously it's a large linear project, so the scale is fairly small.
Right.
Okay.
So just I think that Jackie and Larry kind of understand this from having been here a bunch of times, but the board can't accept new information after the hearing is closed. So if there's something you want to incorporate into your plan set that you don't have for us today, they're going to have to keep the hearing open in order to do that. Okay.
Marla, quick question. Is this the type of change that we could give enough clarity that we know exactly what we're getting?
I think so, but again, I was half listening because I was trying to get to the right plan.
Because obviously, if they say we're going to do this, 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 and this, it's
you
not
can
like
put it in as a condition, right? Yeah,
it
sounds
like
okay. Okay, I'll take your word for that then. So we can probably describe that as a condition, and then you would just submit the plan that matches.
I mean, we may get to the end of the hearing, and there's more.
There might be
stuff.
other things, yeah.
Right? But if that's the only thing, I think we can condition that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. How will you prevent people from parking in the Aviation Deli parking lot rather than the garage if they're flying out somewhere?
We actually talked about that today. if at any time, we monitor that and we do our best. We're going to potentially put up signs that say no overnight parking.
Okay.
And also, if we should decide to let someone park there overnight, we'd have to issue a tag or a
Permit.
ticket.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did I see some barricades out there?
There are now, right.
Some Jersey barriers out there blocking off the driveway,
Right
at least
now.
from Airport Drive. I looked, I tried to see, but I couldn't tell if the driveway at Elizabeth Drive was also barricaded off as well.
And again, we're coming in with another plan for that whole thing.
Okay.
So,
Good. Number 3. I'm going to read this. Staff recommends the board affirm modification of this criterion implied in site plan approval SP 2441 to allow the recreation path civic space to be used as a civic space and as credit for 100% of the required site amenity for the North Concourse expansion project. Okay. Nobody objects to that? Okay. Thank you. Okay, yes. Number 4, this is regarding the potential, giving potential credit for the site amenity and open space for the future projects. What are your comments about that? Do you want me to read it?
I'm sorry.
Do you want me to read it?
No, I think we're all set with this. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So number 4 is for the, how can I explain this differently than it's explained in here? The board is giving this rec path as site amenity or civic space to be used for future projects. Because future projects require, 6% of the floor area to be provided as open space, 50% of it can be off-site. And so it's essentially creating a bank, and this question is what is the size of that bank? So, the pavement itself is 3,500 square feet. I assume that that's sort of a measly credit based on, for what will actually be provided. It's not just the area of pavement that you're providing a landscaped open area. So, the question is, what acreage would be appropriate for this site amenity that you're providing? So one way of calculating it would be to say 50 feet wide, because that's what a greenway is required to have as part of it. But the question was whether you guys had other suggestions or were okay with the 50 feet wide. 50 feet wide would result in about 4 acres of credit.
That's fine.
Okay, number 5. Now I have a question about this. It says staff recommends the board describe the proposed tree location. Shouldn't it be the applicant describe the proposed tree locations?
I think it's just a matter of how we're labeling it.
Pardon me, Larry?
I think it's just a matter of how we're labeling it on the plans.
Okay. The question is, are the tree locations approximate as opposed to conceptual?
We should say approximate. Yes,
Okay.
Approximate, yeah.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Is it worth stipulating the difference? I mean, the way I read it, approximate is that there will be a tree here. It may be 5 feet or 10 feet one way or the other. Conceptual is we may or may not have a tree.
Right.
So the approximate, you're saying the trees are going to be there. The exact location may vary a little bit, as opposed to, we might change the whole thing and we might have half the number of trees. That's what I see as the difference between approximate and conceptual. So I just want to make sure we have a clear understanding when we say approximate, that's what we're looking for.
I say approximate. Jackie, what's your outlook on that?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. That might have just been carried over from when we developed the conceptual plans. But we can certainly update that word to approximate.
Okay. Anything else? Moving on to number 6. We need a breakdown, please, of the landscape budget.
So to clarify, we're required to have the minimum landscaping budget for the North Concourse project of the $382,000. We have the cost estimate for the rec path improvements as $645,000, And we provided the detailed breakdown for the trees. So are you asking for a detailed breakdown of the 645,000?
So in the packet, I think we provided for the board the budget that you had provided. So let me just open that quickly. I had closed that document because I flipped to something else. But are you saying that the landscaping budget that you provided represents all of the trees that are currently proposed for the plan? Because that was unclear to start.
That's a good question. So, in terms of the landscape budget spreadsheet for the airport overall, I believe that's what you're referring to. One slide up, maybe. Great. So that included the 382,000. I see what you're saying. Does that apply to the trees and a portion of the rec path, or which portion are we applying that to?
Right, because in the one that Marty's showing right now, it says the on-site project expenditure is $645,821. On the next page, it shows that you have $67,000 worth of trees. So the question is, how did you get from 67,000 to 640 something thousand?
Stu, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 645,000 is the total cost of the rec path, and
Yeah.
that includes the trees.
Correct. I do not think the 645 includes the trees. I think that is just the path, the shoulders, the drainage, and then obviously we would need to adjust that a little bit to account for the timber guardrail.
And initial pricing that came back from the contractor was even more than that, but that's what we estimated it at. So
So Marla, in that case, I should update that landscaping spreadsheet to include both of those numbers. Is that what you're saying?
That may be the final answer, but I think we're skipping ahead a little bit. So the board typically, when someone proposes a landscaping budget, they automatically grant credit for trees and shrubs, right? And then non-woody vegetation is a maybe, depending on if the other landscaping standards like buffering and shading and those things are met. And then after that, the board considers things like hardscape elements, patios that are made out of something a little nicer, benches, bike racks, that sort of thing. So typically the board doesn't just say, oh yeah, everything that you're doing in the open space areas automatically counts. They typically look for a budget breakdown of what are those elements in the and so they may determine that all of the 645 plus the 67,000 for the plants is fine to be allowed towards required landscaping budget, or they may say like, okay, we're giving you credit for all the improvements, but stopping short of giving you credit for like stormwater treatment or I don't know, whatever. So really what we're looking for is a detailed breakdown of what goes into those numbers.
we can provide any breakdown. I mean, we have costs for all this from actual numbers. So we can break down pavement, we can break out the drainage part that's required because of the area.
Yeah, just
and the
however you
trees.
got to that number, I think would be helpful for the board.
Yeah, we'll gladly do that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, number 7. This is a thought from staff. However, the board may choose to include a condition as to the importance of retaining existing and proposed trees in this area to enhance the function of the rec path as a buffer between the airport and adjoining residential uses. Board, is that a condition that makes sense to you? I see one nodding head.
I would. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say. I mean, I think that I love the design. I love the look of it. I love the meandering path through the area that's now devoid of houses, which for a long time has honestly felt like a scar, but a green scar at least. So now we're sort of taking it to the next step. But I think that anywhere where we can leave existing vegetation, without, if it's there and doesn't have to be cut down, I would clearly support leaving it because I think it's, a great way to create more of a buffer between the airport and the residential area that remains.
we support that from our walk with all the South Burlington departments. That's why we made some of the changes we did with the location to make sure we did our best not to impact anything that was there. So
Yeah, and just to follow on that, during the design, we did really try to stay out of the tree canopy, just with an eye towards, hey, we're gonna have some construction equipment in here. There might be an excavator that will raise up, and we want to make sure we weren't destroying any branches, things like that. There are some trees out there that are not healthy. And those were identified. We talked about those with staff and employees from DPW as well while we were out there, and so those will come down. And so when we were out there, we said, okay, we can adjust the path here to remove the tree and put the path there instead, just so we didn't have any kind of unnatural curves that people would naturally want to kind of cut and destroy the grass. So that's kind of what we did as far as the design goes.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the staff comments. So it sounds like we are not going to be able to close this tonight because there's more information that we need to get. So let's
just real quick.
Sure.
I do have the breakdown. Stu, the cost estimate that you provided in late March is about 578,000 for the rec path, and then if you add in the 67,000, that's where we got the 645. So I do have those items broken down into like clearing and grubbing, tree removal, common excavation, channel excavation of earth. Would it be helpful to show that now for the board to review so that we would be able to close this?
Sure.
Okay, so Marla, should I email this to you, or what's the best way to share that?
If you have a pretty solid connection, we can just allow you to share.
Okay.
Can we, or do we have to allow everyone to share? Okay. Oh, is that the only option? All right. I guess you just have to promise to behave yourself and kick us back to host when afterwards.
Okay, just give me a second here. So these are each of the line items. I don't know if you want me to go through and read them, Marla?
Can you zoom in a bit? I think that we can probably just skim them pretty quickly. So it's site prep and then the actual pavement and then curbing and the improvements at the road crossings, and then stormwater and some signage is what I see as buckets of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, if the board thinks that any of those shouldn't be included, we could say, okay, the bucket of improvements in the roadways isn't as important, but as Larry testified, the city specifically asked for those to be more consistent with how we would prefer rec paths to be built. I would say signage is probably pretty critical to the success of the path as well. If there's anything in there that you guys don't want to include, keep in mind this is 1% typically of a project cost is towards landscaping.
Yeah.
So this would represent the ability to build about $50 million worth of project, which is probably the north terminal that you just got approval for was 30 million or something.
Well, actually, the shell itself and the vertical construction is about 40 million. The
1-4 or 40?
40 million
140
for vertical construction. That's where I believe that number of the 380,000 or whatever we estimated for the fee comes in. So proportionally, that makes sense. So,
yeah, so this would represent like a north terminal and a half.
Yeah, so just to clarify, they're doing this portion of this phase so they can qualify to do a portion of the next phase.
okay, our intent, with the exception of one thing, is to build the whole thing this year.
including the pocket parks and everything.
Oh,
else?
no, not the pocket parts, just the
Just-
path, the
That
path.
would qualify for more, right? Because that would be more.
Yeah,
segment.
right, there'll be more in the future if we do more vertical construction where we can't put landscaping like the next project where is pavement all the way around it.
Right.
So they're banking it, as Marlo
So-
said
Right.
earlier.
We're not
Right,
really.
well, we would come back and we would modify and add amenities in these pockets to make it nicer as people experience it and we get requests or understand what they like, what they don't like, and as future projects move forward. We have, obviously we're coming in for the, we're working, just starting the store, the deli. We are going to be coming back for the SRE building, but right now it appears that we're going to have to utilize all that money on the site of the SRE building, and we won't be able to contribute from that. We thought we were going to be able to. So that's kind of it depends on what comes next. I mean, there are other projects.
Okay.
So, what my point was too, though, is the full rec path was part of your phase 1 master plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not building the full rec path. We're building just the path and then landscaping along the path, but we're not doing the pocket parks and everything else that was
Correct.
included in that phase 1.
Correct.
So we're doing like phase 1A and then phase 2A, and then we're going to come back and do phase 1B, so we can do phase 2B.
Okay.
Or you know what I mean? Like it's not technically to that phasing.
Right.
But
Right.
Thanks for that clarification.
There was one exception to building the whole thing this year. We've been working, if you look at the first section between Airport Road, not to be confused with Airport Drive, and then back onto Airport Drive, that little section through there. We have an agreement with the city of South Burlington, DPW, for stormwater treatment, which is underground chambers on that, a portion of that lot. And with respect to timing, what happened was they did the design and then they had a technical issue after they designed that. We signed an agreement allowing them to use that. Then they found an issue and decided they had to put another structure in, which we've been working out agreement on another piece of property up the road a little bit that's not impacted by this path. But I believe there's been some challenges in the stormwater department, so there's been some turnover. So we were waiting for them because we made a recommendation on how we amend the current agreement to include their second field. So there is a chance, or probably most likely a chance, we won't want to build that until till the city determines when they're going to build the underground chambers. And I'm hoping you'll work with us on that, especially when it comes to the completion of this year with respect to the occupancy of the terminal.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for providing us with the information that will allow us to close tonight. Let's turn to public comment. Let me just say, does the board have any other questions before we? Okay, thanks.
I just have one clarification.
Yeah.
That the 578,220 that was shown for the cost estimate of the rec path, plus 67,600, which was the tree cost estimate that was provided, does equal the 645,820. So the landscape budget spreadsheet that was submitted is accurate.
Thank you, Jackie.
Jackie, real quick before we move on to public comment, can you re-host? Can you transfer the host of the meeting back?
You're testing me, Marty.
Thank you.
You might need to guide me a little bit. I'm sorry. How do I assign you as the host?
I think if you click my little picture, like the 3 dots in the top right corner.
Okay.
And Marty's South Burlington Planning and Zoning. Oh, I think that went to, yeah, you need to do it to South Burlington Planning and Zoning. Sorry, we should rename ourselves so they're more obvious. I'll make myself me. I'm Zoom 2. Town Meeting TV is Zoom 1, and you're South Burlington Planning and Zoning.
So sorry, it looks like it went to, the host is now Z.
Yeah. Sorry, Maya, can you switch it back to either me or Marty, please? Or I can come back and do it.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Comments? Yep. Let's, I know we have one person who wants to make comments. Are there any other people here or online who would like to make comments? Okay. The woman who was eager to make a comment earlier, it is your turn. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Michelle Corpus. I actually have a question rather than a comment. And I would like to say that I am on the Natural Resources and Conservation Commission, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission. I'm speaking as a resident.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, I have been unable to I was unable to come last night to the city council meeting because I was out of town, so I missed Nick's presentation and haven't had a chance to go back and look at that. And I was just curious to know if there's a way to see, like I was unfamiliar with the whole concept of these underground water treatment. And I was curious to know where exactly that is, and perhaps there could be a visual of the maps of where the trail is going, and where those underground tanks would be. Because I do know that the trail alignment changed a couple times, and I'm not sure of what the current alignment is.
Do you want me to respond?
Yeah, so unless the board wants to know the answers to those questions, I'd be happy to walk her through those things. But-
Offline?
yeah.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Board, do you have any interest? I mean, of course you have an interest, but does it make sense to have Marla walk her through this offline? Okay, perfect, great. So the two of you can connect and do that.
I have your email address, so I can send
Great.
you some information tomorrow
Thank
morning.
you very much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Marla.
Any other comments? Okay, I would entertain a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of closing SP 2517, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. The motion is carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Oh, and thank you all. Okay. We're a little ahead of time, but I see our presenters here. So Code of Ethics. Paula, are you doing that?
We are doing it together. So
Oh, okay,
when
good.
you're ready, we'll introduce ourselves and
Okay, please introduce yourselves. And do you want us to introduce ourselves?
you're the board, you're the development review board.
Okay, we're okay, all right. Perhaps you don't know who we are. Okay.
Paul Connor, Director of Planning and Zoning.
I think I'm at the right meeting. I'm here for the Development Review Board. My name's Colin McNeil. I'm the city attorney.
What is your first name, please?
Colin.
Colin, that's right.
C-O-L-I-N.
Yes, thank you.
Colin, could you pull your mic closer to yourself? Thanks. You're very tall, so it's farther away from your mouth just by nature compared to Paul.
All right, take it away.
So I'm just going to need a minute to get loaded up into the Zoom call. And of course, it wants to update something. So
Paul, do you want us to do the slides? Because we have the slides from the packet.
sure. Yeah, if you'd like to, go for it.
Okay, so we're here really just to provide a brief overview of the new municipal ethics code that has been implemented by statute. We are operating under the assumption that this went into effect a little bit ago. There is a video that the Vermont State Ethics Commission put out that was a training that is required by the statute and the code. I believe that all of you have gone through that. So we're going to be significantly shorter than that, but just really here to go kind of a brief walkthrough of it and kind of answer any questions about it that you might have. So we put together a little presentation that is a brief summary of what is only like a 3 or 4 page municipal code of ethics. But the intention was to have, I understand, a universal application across Vermont for every board and commission and municipal employee and council and select board. Because I don't think that there was an issue here in South Burlington, but there was likely an issue in other places in Vermont where they didn't have a code of ethics, or they didn't have an ethics policy, or they weren't following it. So I think they want to stress the importance of it. But since I've been here, we haven't had any issues where there's been allegations of people being unethical. So it wasn't the intention of anything like that to put this through. We didn't adopt it, but we're required to follow it by statute. So the first question, if you want to switch the slide from the intro, is really what is a conflict of interest? It's got a long definition, but the reality is it's an interest in the outcome of a particular matter, or that is in conflict with the proper discharge of the officer's duties. So you are a municipal officer as a development review board. You're defined as someone who's subject as an entity that is subject to this new law. What is not a conflict of interest is any interest that is not greater than that of other individuals generally affected by the outcome of a matter. So what does it require? It gives you a duty to recuse yourself if you have a conflict of interest. So how do you determine whether you have a conflict of interest? You really look to a reasonable person standard. If you have a conflict of interest, which is, as I explained it, your own interest, you need to recuse yourself. If it's an appearance of conflict of interest, which is based on a reasonable person standard, and that reasonable person you look to with knowledge of the relevant facts. So you put a person in your shoes who has knowledge of the facts that you have knowledge of, and if a reasonable person would feel that there's an appearance of a conflict of interest, you likely have a conflict of interest.
Can I interject here?
Please.
So I'm the non-lawyer in this conversation. I think, fundamentally, as the legislature was looking at this and we think about how we apply it, those persons who choose to serve on boards in Vermont live in small, even South Burlington's a small community, and connected communities. So we're aware that, everybody knows somebody who's in front of them. Everybody's a neighbor to something. And I think, what Colin just talked about in terms of the not greater than that of those generally affected is really a way to, a really important component of this. Just because somebody says, oh, I saw that you two took a yoga class in the same building once. Just because somebody thinks that that is the appearance of a conflict of interest doesn't mean that that is what the average person would think. And I think that's the important distinction for you to be thinking about, because somebody always thinks something.
And I think you are aware that the city of South Burlington had a conflict of interest and ethics policy that existed before this statute went into effect. Because they were slightly conflicting, this code is now in effect. The policy is no more. But that policy had essentially the exact same definition of what a conflict of interest is, and it had the exact same exception to conflict of interest, that your interest is no greater than that of another person. The best example of that is property taxes. If you're on a council and you're approving property taxes, yes, they affect you, but they affect everyone else the same way. If you're approving an increase in taxes, or you're approving an increase in budget. So the difference necessarily between what you had in place, which was the policy, and this new code, is that it's a little bit stricter in terms of when you have to recuse yourself than when you used to have to recuse yourself. Formally, under our policy, if you felt you had a conflict of interest, had an appearance of conflict of interest, or had a conflict of interest, you could remain on the board if you made a statement to the effect that I have a conflict, but I still think I can act in the best interest of the city, or something to that effect. This is a little bit stricter, that once you have a conflict of interest, you have to recuse unless good cause for the officer to proceed, and they define what good cause is by these three things. The conflict is amorphous, intangible, or otherwise speculative. The officer cannot legally or practically delegate the matter, or the action is purely ministerial and does not involve substantive decision making, which are all pretty low bar to meet. So you have to meet that standard if you want to stay into the proceeding and not recuse yourself. If you're able to establish that you have just cause, which is right here on the right, I believe it is for you, then you must file a written statement with the board and justifying what the good cause is and why you feel like you can stay on and continue to practice in this matter. The result of this is that if you have a conflict of interest, it's likely that you don't meet one of these requirements. These are very low bar to meet, and you will likely have to recuse yourself.
I think this would be a good point to interject that while the code is somewhat more strict than our former policy, the practice of the board over the years, in the 16 plus years that I've been here, has been to err on the side of that caution. And so fundamentally, the way that you have all operated is, in my view at least, exactly what this code calls for. This code applies to a lot of different bodies, some of which are boards like yourselves where there's multiple people, and some of which are individual practitioners like a town manager or
the treasurer.
And then if you think about the very small towns and what happens if there is only one clerk and no other staff people, what do they do? So that's more oftentimes the context for something like this, and this board has operated really well over the years. And if somebody is truly conflicted and there's a need to step down, there are 6 other board members.
Right. And happy to answer any questions at any time if you have them. We're just trying to walk through this, and I think that Paul is correct. And I think the biggest question that you're going to have to ask yourself is it a conflict of interest? If a reasonable person does not feel it's a conflict of interest, then you do that, then you don't have to go through the good cause and you don't have to file the written statement if it's not a conflict of interest. So that's really the first analysis that's most important to do. Can you move on? Yeah.
On the bottom of the previous page that we went through really quickly, it says the officer shall make a public statement explaining the officer's recusal. Explaining, does that mean like you have to say why?
No, it's interesting. It does say that. But even if you listen to the training that they provided, it's essentially your statement is, I have a conflict of interest and I must recuse myself. They found that to be sufficient, and that's actually what they talked about in the training itself. So I think it's just what is required is just putting something on the record verbally, identifying that there's a reason why you're standing up and moving down away from the table.
Would this be a good time to speak about, in the instance of somebody who does recuse themselves, what they should physically do?
Sure. If you do have a conflict of interest, really you're no longer a member of the DRB. You have a conflict of interest, you're recusing yourself, you cannot participate in the matter any further as a DRB member. That does not say that you can't come right down here, say you're an applicant, and you have a matter before the DRB, you can come down and present to the DRB as a member of the public. You are just no longer a DRB member. That actually happened for that project, correct. You can, as soon as that matter is no longer being discussed, you can come back on. You're just conflicted off that particular matter.
And then I think that what becomes incumbent on the rest of the board is to remember that person is not sitting as one of your colleagues. They're sitting as somebody playing a different role. So, I've seen it in other communities that were like, hey, he or she's now on the other side of the table. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Like, treat them much more like, thank you, Ms. or Mr., and, really demonstrate to somebody who might be tuning in for the very first time that they're being treated the exact same as the prior and the next applicant.
Colin, I have a question for you about how this functions in a deliberative setting. Let's say you're in a deliberation and there's more than one thing being discussed. Can you recuse yourself and sit there, or do you have to leave the room?
I think it would be safest just to leave the room. I think technically you could plug your ears, but you're not supposed to participate in any way or have information that the public wouldn't have. And I think in a deliberative session, you would have access to information that would be considered confidential from the public. So I think the best situation would probably just step out of the room. I'm not involved in this matter as a DRB member. Come back in when that matter is no longer being discussed. And the rest of the board has to treat it a little bit tricky. I think normally some topics might overlap. In that particular instance, you'd have to be careful not to let matters overlap.
Thank
So the code does come with several shall nots. I call them the eight commandments. I'm Catholic, so it's ingrained in me. But just kind of going through this list, a municipal officer shall not act in a manner that can be a conflict of interest for the officer, or direct another person to do something for you that would be a conflict of interest. If you have a conflict of interest, you can't direct someone else to do the same thing on your behalf. You shall not give preferential treatment. You shall not misuse your position for personal or financial gain. You shall not misuse information. You shall not misuse government services or resources. You shall not accept gifts. And you shall not make unauthorized commitments of any kind purporting to bind the municipality. And you shall not benefit for contracts entered into by the municipality. And I'm happy to walk through any questions that you might have about those. I think that there can be any number of scenarios for any one of them. But that's really what the code talks about, is having these specific things that are specifically highlighted as do not do's. I think when it comes down to it, one of the most major questions that you will always ask yourself when you're dealing with a conflict of interest is, am I able to act in the best interest of the city? If I'm not able to act in the best interest of the city, you likely have a conflict of interest and should recuse yourself. An interesting development is that with the statute, the Vermont State Ethics Commission made itself available to answer questions, provide confidential advisory opinions, and essentially be a resource. They also can accept complaints. One of the roles of myself is to be a recipient of complaints and then investigate complaints. So be an investigator if we receive a complaint for an ethics violation. So that was one of the benefits of having the State Ethics Commission be a body that you could reach out to if you had a question. And they've actually been really responsive. We've had a couple instances where you can just reach out and talk to the executive director. Unfortunately, when in preparing for this, I looked on the website today. The Vermont Ethics Commission has suspended all municipal services due to staffing. So they are no longer providing advisory opinions at this time or answering questions. So I think if you do have those questions, come to either myself or to Jared Pellerin, who's the deputy city attorney. We've set it up that if you do have a question and I am providing advice, or the city attorney's office is providing advice to you on that question, and then in that instance, a complaint arises out of that instance, we will not be the investigator. We will pass it on to Steve Locke, our deputy city manager. So there's a process there. So if you have any questions and want a confidential response, feel free to reach out to talk through this while the State Ethics Commission is suspending services for us.
So, Colin, can you speak before it comes to something of that magnitude? If a board member is just uncertain about whether they may or may not have a conflict of interest and are just mulling something over, who should they reach out to?
I mean, I would have said reach out to the State Ethics Commission. I think at this point, it's probably best to reach out to me. And I'll keep my thumb on the button to see whether this changes. Hopefully it does soon. Hopefully maybe they get some more staffing. It looks like they just had a part-time administrative assistant and a part-time executive director. And when they adopted this, I'm sure it was opened the floodgates to several people having a lot of questions throughout Vermont. So I can understand why they are taking a back seat a little bit, but I think up until the point where they're available for services again, come through me.
And obviously on all things, Marla's here, also a resource for you if you just want to have a conversation about something, a very, low stakes conversation.
Colin, I have could read the statute. I haven't, so the answer might be in the statute. But A, other than a direct applicant, for example, who's got standing to raise a conflict of interest? And B, what are the what are the consequences of, for example, a violation of the ethical standards discovered after the fact?
That is a great question. I think that right now what would come about would be similar to what existed with our policy. If there is some sort of violation for the standing, we're going to have to judge that as we go. This is a new statute. We haven't seen it. So I think it would have to be someone in the community who we are a public entity. And so the purpose of this code was established to make sure that the public has the utmost confidence and trust that we're looking out for the best interest of the city in all instances. And so I think that standing might be a little bit tricky if you have someone who's sincerely concerned that a public body or a public officer was not acting in the best interest of the city or was doing something unethical. I think if it's someone from perhaps Texas calling, they might be a little challenged, but at least someone from our community who might have this concern, I think that we would probably be smart to investigate it and treat them that they have standing. I think the consequences could be anything from if you are found, if a person is found to have violated this policy in some respects, there are avenues where you could receive some manner of an admonishment by your board, by the city council, and there is, and that could be public or private. You could also, the DRB is situated statutorily a little bit different. So for other appointed communities, the city council has the authority to just remove the person from that committee. The DRB is a little bit different in that there's a statutory procedure where a good cause has to be found to remove someone. But that could certainly be an avenue that the council could engage in if the allegation was serious enough.
Well, what if beyond the consequences to the person who violated the code, how about a circumstance where, let's say, the denial of a permit turned on the vote of a person who had a conflict?
Again, I think that's a great question. I don't know. My response would be I haven't thought that through in terms of how we would best respond to that. And I don't know if the State Ethics Commission has at this point addressed that. I think that right now, it would have to be that the action is against the individual board member and doesn't change the outcome of the permit.
Which would be different than conflicts of interest in other legal scenarios, isn't it?
It could be, but I think we'd have to revisit it. If that vote was, if it was a tie and there was a 1 vote difference or something along those lines.
Well, even if that person, you wouldn't logically rehear the whole thing because that person not only voted, they sat, they argued, they might have been persuasive all from a biased position.
I believe that there is, and I'm not going to cite a case, but I've in the past heard in trainings that one of the recourses is if the decision of the board is appealed, the environmental court is a de novo hearing. And so in that form, the court is acting freshly. And so that can potentially clear that. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to go any further than that. But
I think beyond what I've answered, I haven't looked into that, so I don't have an answer for it.
I will say in passing, I lost the case precisely on Paul's reasoning. And it's annoyed me ever since. I thought it should have been remanded back to the DRB, but the environmental court didn't think so. So you might be right in some people's eyes, Paul.
I think I might be thinking of that case, but I don't want to cite cases. So, yeah.
That was actually the nature of my question. Somewhat is the anticipated sort of frequency that something like this comes up. I'm guessing is fairly limited, but has there been history in South Burlington that you all are aware of where this has been an issue that needed to be addressed?
Well, I mean, in a very simple one, a few years ago, there was a development project immediately adjacent to John Wilking's house. It was clearly it surrounded his property, and he immediately stepped down and recused himself. So, I mean, that's sort of a pedestrian example, but that is the most common version of it, is that somebody is, clearly, and then I think he had somebody else represent his interest in front of the board because he wanted to be really clear that he was not exerting undue influence.
To answer, go ahead.
Based on the current code that you just described, he could have stepped down and gone and sat at the table in opposition to the project, or spoken from the audience in opposition to the project, correct?
Correct. He could have with our prior policy as well.
Right. Okay.
Right. I think where it gets tricky is it's hard to manage the perception in that instance. Because, the public sees them sitting at the table and then sees them sitting in the room. And it's hard to imagine that person doesn't have more influence than the general public.
Right. And I think in that particular instance, he didn't necessarily have an outcome that he was seeking of approval or denial. He had interests in the project, and he didn't want to Marla's exact point, be in a situation where his presence was raising questions about the project. He just wanted to have his interests represented through somebody.
I think just to answer the question, since I've been here, I haven't heard of this being an issue with any of our commissions or boards. And I think we did have experience of a counselor at one point recusing themselves and then speaking at the podium as a member of the public right away. And it didn't seem to draw any concerns that opinion was given more weight than any other opinion.
There's a fairly famous example for those who've been around for a long time. Years ago, when the Walmart was first proposed in St. Albans town, there was a DRB member who wore a baseball cap saying, "I love Walmart." And that was a subject of a lot of stress in the legal system after that, about whether, what that person, so that was a little less of a conflict of interest and a little bit more of a prejudging a case, but it's in the same universe of things.
Did have one question. I think it's probably the most common thing that'll pop up, and Mark, actually, at the beginning of the last application, I think it might have been before you came in, the applicant has retained Parsons as their engineer, and Mark brought up that in the course of his job, he deals with Parsons. Now, Parsons is a huge, or Jacobs, excuse me, another huge engineering company. Is Parsons even around? But I know there are a lot of folks in their jobs deal with different contractors. Is that, to what extent does that become problematic? Because the number of architects and engineers and landscape architects is relatively small. And in the course of events, similarly, my wife works for UVM, and we've had UVM here. Now, do I think that there's any conflict with the fact my wife works for UVM along with what other 10,000 people work there? But to what extent should we manage that sort of relationship?
I think the baseline is that each case is unique. And so I can't say one way or another. I don't think anyone could say one way or another that's a conflict or it's not a conflict. And I think the other thing to keep in mind that Paul's already indicated is we live in a small community. We live in a small state, and you're always going to have, generally a board of this size, you're going to know people that are present before you in one way or another. And I think what you have to look at is just that definition of a conflict of interest. Do I have an interest, be it financial? Do I have something that makes me not be able to act in the best interest of the city because of this? Not just because I know this person, but is there something that is benefiting me, or people would appear would benefit me, a reasonable person would appear to benefit me? That's really the standard.
More so than the average person.
Right.
So, and I guess that's one of the things, like John Wilking, I don't know, but obviously Mark does, because we just had cake and he came because they were on the board together.
Right.
So when he comes in front of the board and he knows half the board relatively well from having spent many hours with them, do I think my fellow board members are capable of putting aside any preferences? Absolutely. Right. Is the average person sitting in the audience going to believe that? Well, and what's reasonable.
Right.
That's where I kind of get into problems because there's, as we've acknowledged, there are always people that are going to be unreasonable.
One of the things that we have advised over the years is one of the best cures for the perception of a conflict of interest is a disclosure.
Yeah.
My partner works for Beta. Pick a company. They are custodial staff. They're not going to be making decisions on what takes place, or in your example, I am neighbors with, or I live down the street from so and so, and our kids sometimes play with one another. I don't see this as being any particular conflict of interest. So bringing it to light, if there is something, the average person, that's the test for the average person, right?
And I think, John, you've always disclosed. Mark, you're good at disclose. People disclose, and I've disclosed when O'Brien has been here. And I mean, people can always question whether you can be objective.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it's because we live in a small community, and every case is going to be unique. Like John, your example of your wife works for UVM, and UVM comes before us. I wouldn't see that as a conflict. But if your wife is like a radiologist, and we're looking at a radiology department going in on Tilly Drive, and she's going to be working there, that's a far different story. And that would be what I would perceive as a conflict, because she's benefiting from that project going in. But just working at UVM, I'd say that's way too big of a thing. Yeah, we want to think it was a small company, and that company was coming before us. Yeah. That's clear cut. So I think each one's a case by case.
Well, I've recused myself twice. On one occasion, on the one hand, we're very, very old and dear friends, and they were opposing a developer who, in fact, had been a client. So I tried to, for a minute, I tried to rationalize and say, well, we have, a perfect cancellation. Here we have, here we have a proton, kind of, or something, And I thought, maybe I'm doubly conflicted. But that's an interesting, the professional question is an interesting one, except there was one case where I've recused myself twice. That was once. The other one was when a developer appeared who, in fact, I had represented on a matter in the past. I wouldn't mind of having him back. Now, did I think that was really going to drive what I thought? Well, no, I didn't really think so. But in the back of my mind, I say, gee, I'd sure like him to come back. So I recused myself. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a subjective, when Joe McNeil was your age, Superior Court judges' approach to this kind of conflict was, well, it's a small state. That was the standard answer to conflicts,
Yeah.
But I mean that division between you can't completely eliminate the subjective element from that.
Right. No, we're humans.
We beat it pretty much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. You can
I'm
get
a-
the next
I
agenda
know.
item as well. So you want to move on to agenda item number 8?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Agenda item. Let's move on to agenda item number 8. I'm sorry. It's the cake. Okay. Please.
You want to read it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had kind of folded up my papers when I thought I was going to be entertained. I'm sorry. Okay. We are going to, agenda item number 8 is a presentation on the city attorney and the planning and zoning staff liaison, the role with the development review board. And we have a document that we've all had the opportunity to read. It's actually a memo somewhere. And I'm wondering if anyone has any questions about it. Board, because I know this has come up in the past when we've been probably not deliberating because it's been an open meeting talking about an issue, and we wonder about the legal implications of this or that. And we've asked staff if we could get a legal consultation, that's not the right word, but a read on a legal opinion about it. And I think we don't want to overuse our legal staff resources. By the same token, I think there are times when we want to be cautious to attend to any legalities that need to be paid attention to.
Yeah, I think the two instances that came up that so I've been on the board for just less than a year, are FAA regulations and things that govern the property around the Burlington airport, and then also some ADA considerations when a project before us also has some ADA compliance that is being discussed. And I'm certainly not an expert, and so just making sure that we are adhering to any legalities there that, you know, we are not, other than Frank, legal experts, and Frank's legal expertise obviously is limited to his area of expertise. So I think those are the two that came up for me that I was like, ooh, I'm actually uncomfortable having an opinion about this until I know the legalities of those areas.
So I think we want to use our legal staff, the city's legal staff, appropriately, not overuse them, but make sure that we are covering ourselves by seeking legal opinion when we feel a little uncertain about something.
And I think just to respond to that, I think in at least I can recall the ADA situation, it was brought to us. We were able to research it and come back and provide an opinion that hopefully was helpful to you in your deliberations on that subject.
I think I would draw a line between interpretation of legal matters and legal interpretation of board matters. And maybe that's something you could speak to.
Sure. So I think that the LDRs were approved and passed by the council and by the planning commission. I think it's your duty as the DRB to interpret what's in there and apply it to the particular projects that come before you. There are always going to have to be interpretations of that language. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's really clear cut, but other times it's what does this language mean? And it really, that's the purpose of the DRB, to provide those interpretations and make those, figure out how best that language applies in that particular situation. I think the legal review would more likely come in to, is there a case that's outstanding? Is there a federal law that's outstanding that has implications here? That would likely require us to have to do some research outside of this process. And I think that what we tried to address in the memo is that this could come likely through the staff, that if you have these issues, that they would bring them up to the staff can reach out to us, and we can do work on them and either provide you a memo that would be helpful, provide you however the legal opinion would be helpful to you, provide you that guidance. But the difference really is we're providing the guidance based on what a court has done, what a statute has done, what's out there outside of the LDRs.
Well, I think the FAA and the ADA were completely appropriate. That's precisely the thing to bring to council. Right? And otherwise, it falls on us. I mean, if it's not extraneous to the body of the LDRs, then it's on us to figure out what it means. That's what you're saying, right?
That's it, yeah.
I'm interested in John's thoughts.
And
I could see the bubbling.
This is one of those areas where Marla and I occasionally will butt heads. I'm going to be that guy for a minute. And back when I was in Jersey, before we moved up here, I did 6 years as a member of the governing body and a member of the planning board. And that's kind of our equivalent of the planning board is roughly the same. And we had a zoning board, which was kind of what we're doing here with the. And one of the things that they did is each of those boards went out and had their own RFP and had their own attorney that was at every meeting. Of course, they didn't vote on anything, but they weighed in on anything that seemed to have legal matters, any questions that came up, any clarification of what legal term of art means, because some of the stuff in the LDR is not written in plain language. So they were there for a lot of that clarification. And, this is one of the areas where Marla and I have disagreed. We dump a lot of that burden on Frank. Almost every meeting, Frank explains something to us and how, what it really means and decodes it for us into.
But which you are free to completely disregard.
Absolutely, and we understand that. And yes, I have. But my point being that there are questions that often come up. So I am probably more likely than most to say, well, what does this mean? And it also kind of brings a question is, as a board, what do we have to do to get a legal opinion? Do we have to vote on it? And does a majority have to say we want to get an opinion from you? It seems there's a lot of gatekeeping going on. And I don't know if that is just to protect your time and the time and availability of your office, that you really don't have the ability to provide that, or if there's a budgetary component to not wanting to use too many hours. But it does seem to be one of those things that we would really be at a distinct disadvantage if we didn't just happen to have an attorney on the board who can answer a lot of those sort of questions for us.
I can't avoid being anecdotal, A really annoying thing is when you're dealing with an administrative body that has an attorney sitting right there at the table, like where Marty's sitting, only he's a lawyer, right? And he sticks his 2 cents in when you're trying to talk to the board. It couldn't be more annoying. We are the body. I think Colin said it squarely. This is we can read. We're all educated, and by the way, it's not completely accidental that some people are more informed about one thing than another. It's good that we all bring diverse experience here. You happen to have a lawyer, you happen to have an architect, but that's not completely coincidental from the standpoint of the city council. I would think that they look at the composition. Presumably they want some little bit of expertise at least going on, and then with a lot of input from other people.
And they seek that information out from us. Every time they make appointments, they say, what kind of skills are you looking for? What kind of knowledge base?
But I think the point is that technically this body can be made of 7 lay people, right? We do not have to have expertise to do this. Right. And be frank, we're already being assisted by city employees, right? The whole point of the staff is to provide us some basis to start reviewing. Otherwise, we should be receiving the whole application and doing our own work,
exactly.
right?
By the time it gets to us, we're
so grateful.
I have a quick question, I guess. Is the city attorney's office inherently required to represent a decision by the DRB if it's appealed?
I'd like to say, I think we likely would. I think that I can't say unequivocally yes or no, but I think in 99% of the circumstances, I think we would. There are instances where the DRB can appeal its own decision. So I think that that gets a little tricky. So I think that our obligation is to represent the city.
Right.
And likely if a body of the city is being appealed or challenged, we would provide support to that body.
Except in one recent, since you're here, is all this being recorded?
Yeah, I believe so, yes. I believe we are in public session.
I know where you're going.
I think there's also a situation where
I think I won't say.
I think that would be part of valor.
I think in the years I've been on the board, the role that I've always looked at the city attorney as is when Marla and Marty have exhausted their sort of knowledge, and we say, okay, can we get an opinion? And that's kind of what it's really come down to. And they'd even weigh in, we really should probably get an opinion from the city attorney. Because, yeah, for the most part, we have the regulations. It's our job to review them and apply them. And it's that occasional 1% gray area where we're like, we need some clarification.
Well, keep in mind, though, we're not writing these reports in a vacuum,
Oh,
right?
I know. Yeah.
Like,
by the time they come to us, they're 99% vetted.
Well, and I've sent it to DPW, and if there's a question of an outside regulation, I've talked to Colin or to Jared. These things, and we include comments. There was one decision recently, or one staff report recently, where we used the legal team as a normal technical reviewer. I don't remember what case it was, but I think Jared wrote a paragraph that we popped into the staff report. That's very uncommon, because it's very uncommon to have a legal matter come up as part of an application. Usually applicants come in and they want to get to yes within the framework of the LDR. And if they have to reach something outside, that comes up later, because they're like, well, we were going to try to comply, in the most direct way possible, but we can't because of some outside regulation. So we're going to, then we bring in legal. What were you going to say, Paul?
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay.
I guess for me, one of the questions is, Mark, you said when there's something that needs to go to council, we bring it to council, or like we ask. But I think that maybe in John's experience, like we ask is like not a defined term. Like, what is it that precipitates me and Marla to actually convey that request to council? Like, is it a 4-3 vote, or is it just one person saying something? And I think that maybe could be a little more clearly defined, because I remember on the ADA issue specifically, like we were pretty in the weeds on that one.
Well, and it really came down to, do we think the city wants to defend this? And I think for me, looking back, we shouldn't care. It should just be what we think meets the LDR, and then that's up to you. That's your problem, right?
But like we had an internal meeting, like this is where the board's going, and there were like some alarm bells raised, like whoa, like that seems like an interesting interpretation of that language. And so it was like, oh shoot, should we have advanced this further as staff prior to getting to this point? But there's just not like a set convention for when that stuff happens. So I think that would be helpful to maybe not define in this meeting, but just sort of work towards or something.
I don't know if there could actually be a defined line. I think there's some instances where our opinion would be helpful. There's other instances where our opinion would not be needed in a particular situation. I think it probably is a case, like, again, it's a case by case situation. And I think to go back to your thought earlier about us defending, I think sometimes it's up to the city council too. So if the council doesn't want to go pursue a matter, then we maybe wouldn't pursue a matter, but that would be decided probably, in a confidential way.
And I think, Charles, just to your last question from a minute ago, I think the board already all knows this, but you should always feel empowered to make the decision that you feel is the best decision based on the facts that you have. If you need additional facts, come get them. The board doesn't need to burden itself with the question of what happens if this gets appealed. You should make the right decision that you all feel is the right decision in interpreting the regulations. Yeah. Right. And I think in that instance, the question comes up of, is there, to Jody's original point, is there an external fact or facts that that should be brought in about things that are not about the regulation for the board to have knowledge of, that kind of thing. And those are rare. But yeah,
but even just then, like you said, if Charlie needs extra facts, go get them. But like Charlie can't email Colin, like, so that's the blocking point there. That's what needs, I think, to be a little bit more clearly defined in terms of like the relationship between the city attorney and the board.
So what you're saying is a more clear protocol for the board to affirm that they are seeking legal counsel?
Yeah. Because otherwise it's discretionary to you and to me of like, does this actually need to
Right,
go?
because functionally, somebody says, I don't know, should we get city attorney review? And then I look, and if like 4 people are nodding their heads, I'm like, all right, the board wanted city attorney review. And then if nobody else takes up that flame, then I'm like, well, one person brought it up. You know,
I think
it's
it
not a
would
real
be
formal
helpful
process.
if the board is having a substantial discussion about it to give clear direction to staff if that's something that you're seeking the attorney to write an opinion or come to a board meeting, a deliberative session. I also would want to parallel that with Marla and Marty as your staff liaisons. I would hope that they're always empowered to do their job of reaching out to other parties as necessary. Here's this thing that came up. I'm going to go talk to the city engineer about this question, so that you remain informed throughout. That they're always empowered to be using their professional judgment to help you.
I think a lot of that is in some ways invisible to us because that's your job that you do in order to bring the substantive report that you bring to us for review. So I think I'm the newest member of the board, so there's a lot of things that I feel like I've learned just by watching how you've prepared that. And I know, because you've said how much time goes into that. And so I think that's the thing that gives me confidence too when you are making a recommendation for how something could be considered, that you have done the due diligence that I would want to do if I were, being asked to make the decision, which I am. So I think that's the part that probably comes with some experience where folks who have been on the board for a longer period of time have seen that prep work throughout that period of time, and I'm still learning some of the ways that Marla and Marty are engaging with other city employees to get us that information and that statement of facts.
Deliberating is considered private, right? Or private knowledge, right? If we ask Marla to specifically go to you to get an opinion, that becomes public. Or is that information still, what's the term, privileged to us in our deliberative session? Because if that's the case, then we should probably make official requests from the DRB to outside a council or opinions from the public members of the.
I think if you're trying to differentiate between like the city attorney and an outside counsel, pretend we're the same thing.
What about the public works, right? If I was saying, pretend we have no one on the board that knows anything about stormwater, right? And there's some part there, and we're in deliberative session, we want to know more, right? You have to write.
Then it really should be reopened in that circumstance. Okay. In that one, if there's a fact that is not generally known, that you would say, boy, if I knew the answer to this, it would inform my decision, then the applicant and the public should have the opportunity to refute that.
I think it is different from this. It's going to be different from the city attorney. I think, as Marla said, it's very rare. It's very rare that we're actually going to have some sort of paragraph displayed in a staff report. Most likely, our report would be a confidential opinion that would be attorney-client privileged communication that you could take into consider, discard, do with what you will, but it would be our opinion to you, and it would remain confidential.
I still think we should implement an official way to make it That's an internal.
I mean, sort of like how we invoke technical review for traffic study or legal opinion, should be that level.
I think that's up to you guys as to exactly how you do it. You could do it by formal motion. The Planning Commission, which has a very different job than you all, but they often, in matters that are a little bit below formal motions, they'll do straw polls, so people on the record, but it's not a vote of formal motions and things. You could say, I'd like to see a show of hands, who would like to do this? That's up to you all as to what procedures work well and what provides clarity to Marla and Marty.
Well, things in deliberation, which is where this comes up, are not
correct
really voted on.
Right. But it still would be helpful to know, is the majority of the board seeking?
No, we always have either a consensus or we know when we have a dispute.
Does that help, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm trying to help Marla and Marty, right?
Yeah,
I don't want
same.
Marla. I don't want Marla and Marty trying to read people's faces and trying to figure out. I think we need to have, if people are saying we want city attorney, we should just do a straw poll then, and
Yeah, I
or
agree.
however we want to handle it in deliberative session that other people don't need to know about, right? But
I
you know.
thought we always did do that. I thought we sort of said, hey, before the next meeting, can we get the city attorney to weigh in on this issue that we're really struggling with? And then we'll get it in the packet ahead of time so that it's not made as a public. We do a little deliberative session before the next meeting or something like that.
I think just making sure that when you say, do we want to do that, that you're being clear that
Right.
A
It's a
majority
decision
of you
point.
are
That's what
seeing
I'm saying.
that.
When I say,
Yeah.
do we want to sort of make sure that.
And then
the board-
following up on that, is it the board's responsibility to self-police? And if there are 4 members of the board who want to get the city's attorney's opinion on like the definition of a tree versus a shrub, like if they vote 4-3, we want the city attorney to spend time defining tree from shrub. Do we pass that along because it was 4-3, or do we have a role to say, whoa, I don't know, that seems like a bad use of the city attorney's time?
I have a strong opinion about that. We shouldn't be that dumb, but if we are, I don't think you are a gatekeeper for that purpose. I feel pretty strongly about that we're the board. If we want to know something from the city attorney, then we want to know. Unless these guys want to argue about it.
Just from a process perspective, and we don't have to hash this out here, but my memory of how this has gone in the past is what we're talking about in deliberative sessions when this comes up. I recall that being like a much more, like the straw poll does happen. What I'm hearing and what my recollection is when it becomes a little muddy is when we are in the public session and someone says, oh, that might be helpful to hear from the city attorney. And then maybe no one picks up the thread and then we move on. So I think, if someone is bringing that up in our public sessions, I feel it's probably on the board member who's saying that to say, maybe we want an opinion from the city attorney on this. Can we take a quick straw poll and not put that on staff? You know what I mean? Because in deliberative session, I think that happens. So I guess I just wanted to vocalize that of like, I think that's on us. And if that makes sense for us as a process, because I can imagine if someone did that out of the blue, we'd be like, oh, wait, we don't normally do that. But it seems like that's fair to both us and staff in this forum, because I think that's when it gets muddy.
Can I make an observation about the way the board operates? Generally, I think you are all very interested in the success of your community and are trying to find a way to say yes. And if, I just want you to remember that the city council and city manager ultimately have the decision over how the city attorney's office uses their time. And so if they decide like that they're getting questions about what's the difference between a tree and a shrub too often, that door may be shut with nothing to do with me. So just, don't say yes just for the sake of being agreeable, I guess is what I'm saying.
Anything else? What is the difference between a tree and a shrub?
I was just going to express my gratitude for you both being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you
And to
very
staff
much.
too for making this happen. I really
Well, and
appreciate
thank you all for all the tremendous work that you do on behalf of our community every day.
It's our pleasure. Is it? Is that right? Is it our pleasure?
You all, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
We have one more agenda item, and that is to approve the minutes of April 15th, 2025. I was not here for that meeting, so we'll leave it up to you to make a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of April 15th, 2025.
I will second.
Thank you. Any discussion about the minutes? All in favor of approving them, say aye.
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 Opposed? No. Is there any other
Are you
business?
abstaining or are you aye?
Me?
Yes.
I abstain. Yes.
Thank you.
I thought I said aye, but I probably did, but just out of habit. Is there any other business?
No other business.
Okay. We're a half hour earlier than we thought we'd be.
Nice job, Tim.
All right.
We
Thank
can all
you.
sleep well tonight. Thank you, everyone.
You want to formally tell them it's closed for the stenographer?
Are you coming down with a cold?
Tis the season.
But we're
I'm like, why am
saying
I
it's
itching?
meeting is
Okay.
closed as of.
Why am I tired? Why do I have a headache? Like, oh, right, pollen. Pollen. It always catches me off guard.
Marty, speaking of that ADA case, did they get what they did? Is it a lot easier